So this is hello, hi Seemant.
Hey, hi.
Hi, uh, meet Samhita from our marketing team as well.
Hi,
Hi,
Smita.
Seemant. Hello.
Thank you for coordinating all that you did.
Of course, anytime. And we're really excited for the session today. We'll just, unfortunately, we weren't able to start it in a practice session. Attendees have already started dialing in, and I'm sure closer to 3, we'll have more folks dialed in.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to give screen sharing rights to Seemant, or Seemant, do you want to present us? Do you want us to present?
I'll just share the presentation with you. Would be great if you could share it,
No?
actually.
You can
Works.
share on the chat, yeah, or like directly on WhatsApp.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Priya, if you are, Seemant, if you're sharing it with Priya on WhatsApp and Priya can send it to me, I will take care of the
Yeah.
screen sharing.
Yep, just sending it.
Okay, thank you. Let's wait for more participants to join.
I'm just making both of you co-hosts as well so that you have screen sharing permission just in case. Priya, Seemant, we'll just wait for another minute or two because I see that number steadily climbing. We'll just wait for a minute or two while more people dial in, and then we'll get started with the session. Yeah.
Sure.
Sounds good.
And to those of you who are just dialing in, thank you for joining us today. We will just get started in the next few minutes. We're just waiting for a few more folks to dial in. All right, I think we can get started. I'll just take a quick minute to talk about NSRCEL with all of our attendees today before handing the session over to you, Seemant. Okay, so first of all, to all those who have joined, Seemant, Priya, welcome to the session. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today. I'm Samhita. I'm a part of the marketing team here at NSRCEL, and I'll just take a quick 2 minutes to talk to you about what we do in case you're new and you don't know what NSRCEL does yet. So NSRCEL is essentially the entrepreneurship and incubation arm of IIM Bangalore. IIM Bangalore has 10 centers of excellence, and one of those is NSRCEL. We work in the startup ecosystem, as a bridge between academia and industry, and we've been doing this for a little over 2 decades now. We were set up in the year 1999, 2000, early 2000, by, we were set up in the year 2000 with a grant from NS Raghavan, one of the co-founders of Infosys. And yeah, today we are this picture that you see that has NS Raghavan in it. And today we are about 22, 23 years old as an incubator. And because of, how we are situated in a management institute and a leading management institute at that, we have access to some of the um, brightest minds in academia today, the brightest minds working in the entrepreneurship and research spaces. And we, as an incubator, work with founders from across the country. We have founders in 25 states and 3 union territories today. And so in this work that we do, we are able to work with both the industry as well as academia. And we really try to be a bridge between these two, right? And so that has been our mission, and our vision has been to foster fundamental research in entrepreneurship. We run 14 different programs in a calendar year. They're all based on either the profile of the entrepreneur, the sector of the startup, or the stage of the startup. To know more about our programs, you can always check it out at the NSRCEL website. Seemant is an alumni of the Impact Orbit program. The Impact Orbit program is looking for tech-enabled social innovations. Here's a little bit about the Impact Orbit program. We've had some alumni in the recent past, such as Vigyan Shala, Milap, and Farmers of Forests. These are all either for-profit or not-for-profit models in the impact space, and they also have tech-enabled solutions. So applications for cohort 5 of Impact Orbit are currently open. There are certain criteria and there are certain things you can expect from the program. To find out the latest information about the criteria and also what the program has outlined for founders of today, you can check that out at the NSRCEL website. Without further ado, I will introduce Seemant and then we can get started with the session that I'm sure you all are waiting for. So Seemant, like I mentioned, is an alumni of the Impact Orbit program here at NSRCEL. Seemant is by Seemant traded code for classrooms to witness India's education challenges firsthand. After he comes from a diverse background. He is an IIM graduate, an engineer, he's been a primary school teacher, a math lead for a global not-for-profit, and a lead experimenter for flipped classrooms with the global technology giant. He has worn a few hats before founding Meraki. He founded Meraki to focus on building strong early foundations for children in collaboration with the state governments of Punjab and Uttarakhand to impact the development and learning of over 10 lakh children across 47,000 Anganwadis. For the work that Meraki has done, they've been recognized as a world-changing idea, the Education Non-Profit of the Year. They've also received a silver at the Anthem Awards, and they have been nominated to be among the top 15 ECE interventions globally at MIT's Solve Initiative. And with that, to conduct today's session, over to you, Seemant.
Thanks, Amita. Thanks for sharing a little bit about NSRCEL and about me. Like you mentioned, I am an alumni of NSRCEL and IIM Bangalore both. So happy to facilitate this today.
Thank you, Seemant. I'll just get started. Give me a minute. I'll share the presentation.
Sure. So while Samita shares the presentation, I just quickly wanted to, I guess, say a couple of lines about why this session and why today. So scaling impact while staying lean is a topic obviously close to my heart. I run an organization called Meraki, which I started immediately after graduating from IIM Bangalore post in 2016. We got registered in 2017, and from there, we spent a few years trying to figure out our beat on how to really scale our organization. We spend a lot of time on grounds, working in the communities, where we focused on the depth of the intervention for a long time, for about 3-4 years. And once we had the confidence and the results to back our interventions, the focus then began to kind of scale the intervention. One of the prevalent narratives currently, both in the social impact space, seems to be that in order to scale, you have to build a behemoth. You go from 10 employees to 50 to 100 employees. And then from a ticket size of 10 lakhs, 30 lakhs to 1 crore, 5 crores, and so on and so forth. That's one narrative that's out there. We've been able to do this pretty lean, where we've scaled from 20 Anganwadis to about 47,000 Anganwadis, while keeping our team size less than 15 all throughout. And that's some of the learnings that I wanted to share with you today, and really try to break down the process of how we were able to do that. And hopefully there are some thoughts that can be generated. A few things that we've been able to do, obviously, is that we've been able to, with a team size that's less than, like I said, 15, we've been able to, launch two programs, state-wise programs in Delhi and in Uttarakhand that were launched by the Chief Minister of both those states. We've been able to launch a policy in Punjab, which was focused on regulation of private preschools. That was as a direct result of the work that we've done in the state. And currently all our interventions are running across these 47,000 plus Anganwadis across the states of Punjab and Uttarakhand. So in some sense, what I'm trying to say is that we've kept it lean and we've also been able to scale. So today's conversation largely is just about learnings from that experiment. We can move on to the norms quickly, Samita. Norms aren't many. The simple things are essentially this is a conversation, so please feel free to use Q&A, ask as many questions as you want. Don't worry about taking notes while we are discussing a specific topic, because all the resources that are in the presentation will be obviously shared with you. And finally, and the most important one, obviously, is outside of all the noise that is about the manner in which you should be building your organization. The entire thing is about you always have options to build in the manner that's most comfortable to you, that is most natural to you actually. And today's session hopefully will be able to bring that clarity on what are some of those options. If lean is the option, then what are some of the ways that you can go on think about it. The next slide, please. Can we put this on full screen, Samita, if possible?
Is it okay now, or is it looking slightly zoomed in?
Yeah, it's actually cutting the screen.
Okay.
There you
Priya,
go.
do you want to try sharing your screen? I think.
Yeah,
Does-
yeah.
Okay, I'll just hand it over to you. As co-host, you should have.
Is it okay?
Yeah, we can maybe remove the preview section.
Uh,
I mean, this should be fine. Yeah, hide sidebar.
yes. Is it okay now?
Yeah. So the hope and assumptions are a couple. In terms of the hope, essentially the idea is to sort of build an alternative narrative. Staying lean isn't for everyone as much as building bulky is. The key idea obviously is to figure out what works for you. Also, I'll try to give as many tangible tools and strategies, or at the least try to help you think about scale while staying lean. Obviously, it comes out of the limited experience I have of building Meraki. So these might not be exhaustive in any way. I just want to make sure that you know that, obviously. So do take them in the context of Meraki, obviously. And then assumption is that we won't talk a lot about impact and evaluation of impact of obviously in the session today. What I want to definitely point out is that the assumption today is that we are talking about scaling because in some sense we have a product market fit, or we have a program that we truly believe can provide immense value to our beneficiaries. Having said that, we move on. Let's first of all, take a few seconds to quickly define what scaling, what building lean, or what impact essentially is. Scaling in some senses is essentially different from growth. It's about serving exponentially more beneficiaries and customers than you already do. How do you really do that? You do that in a couple of ways. Obviously, one is it's kind of almost, and if you are comfortable with math on an XY axis, we're able to see a logarithmic on an exponential growth. Then obviously you're scaling. This can also be measured in terms of your TAM. If you have an idea of what your TAM is, and if you're able to plot it against your TAM against the time that you're taking, and if you're seeing an exponential growth in that way, also tells you that you're scaling versus growing. Building lean in a lot of ways is defined as being efficient, being efficient, being but essentially, in my understanding, what building lean means is that if you're investing a rupee, then you're able to create maximum bang or a maximum return out of that rupee. So that's essentially how I define building lean as. An impact obviously is leaving a significant impression or influence on something, which means that, for example, if you're working in agriculture and your focus is on improving farmer income, then for every rupee invested, how much, or every 100 rupees invested, how much of the impact on farmer income are you having, is the large question that you'd want to be asking yourself.
Hey, Seemant, really quick. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A section about what Meraki does.
Yeah.
So maybe we could go about that. So the context is a little more set for the session, so people can piece together what you're saying and relate it back better, I guess. So they just want to know, there are a couple of questions from Lisa and Mamta.
Right.
More details about the organization and what kind of education does Meraki take care of?
Right. So we work primarily with the government school, government-run Anganwadis. We work with the Women and Child Development Department, focusing on children under 6 years of age. So our focus is early childhood care and education, where the idea is to ensure every child who enters school is ready for it. In order to do that, we work with the government on 4 fronts. One is building the capacity of the Anganwadi workers, of the parents of the children that we are working with. Third piece is strengthening the partnership between the Anganwadi worker and the parent, and the fourth piece is the advocacy piece that we work on. No, we are not dependent on grants. Grants is not our sole area of is not our sole funding criteria. We have different financial sort of models. Our biggest source is government funding, and that's primarily, I think, the question that was asked.
Yeah, that's pretty much all the questions that are there in the Q&A section right now.
Sure.
Yeah, you can. Thank you.
No worries. So while we're looking at scaling impact while staying lean, let's first focus on what scaling impact really means. Can you move to the next slide? And to understand this, let's look at like a case scenario, right? The case, I'll give you a minute to just go through the case. And my question to you is, the question obviously is, how does X scale? And I would love for you guys to respond or give the answers via the chat option here. The context is that there's an organization X, which is in 2021 was a 4-year-old organization. It's a 10-member community-based organization. It served 5 communities on ground by providing in-person workshops for child caregivers in Anganwadis via its own hired community workers, with promising results that built caregiver capacity and impacted student learning or improved student learning. X wants to do more. X is an organization. Results show X has a product market fit that should be extended to more beneficiaries. X's budget is around 35 lakhs a year. Now, clearly the intention here is for X is to kind of take this organization from 5 communities to more. The question that I have for you is, how does X scale? Let's take a minute to just stress that, and I'll take through the the responses, answer through the responses as well. Would love for you to share.
There's a few answers or responses in the Q&A section.
Yeah. Hire full-time staff for training, make training digital through use of technology. Relevant answers: collaborate with smaller groups having similar interest goals. Absolutely relevant. Use technology to replicate on-ground success and scale. Yep. ensure quality monitors are met through trainers and user workshops, partnerships. So partnerships and digital trainings, use of tech essentially seems to be some of the responses. Some more communities extend to different geographies, more staff, obviously is another response. Have a hybrid approach, in-person and tech-based. Yep, relevant answers. Maybe we can move on, Samita. I think one of the things that, for this specific case, let's move on to the next slide. For this specific case, let's assume that this X's goal is to go from 5 to 5,000 communities right now. And assuming that that's exponential in their context. The most basic questions, obviously, and these are not exhaustive, but the most basic questions that will pop up in everyone's mind is, who will conduct these workshops? Because what you're saying is that these workshops are being conducted by community workers. Will it be then your own community workers, which means that then if you had 5 community workers working in 5 communities, then will you have then 5,000 community workers? Or are you going to leverage other structures and partners, like someone mentioned, you could use partnerships with other NGOs to kind of do that. So this is the first basic question that will pop up. Who will pay for this, obviously? Are you going to raise capital or your markets? Are you going to do this through government, or are you going to raise philanthropic capital as well? Will you ask your customers or your partners to pay? For example, if you're scaling through the NGOs, are you going to charge your NGOs for certain services that you're providing, or are you going to ask the caregivers to pay for it? These are important questions, right? Who's the doer and the payer of these services? And then finally, obviously, when you are small, when you're working in 5 communities, there is a certain level of control that you have over what you're putting out there. In this particular case, will you control the total value chain? So in this case, because it's an organization that focuses on workshops, there is, I'm guessing, curriculum, content, training, all of that delivery essentially is a part of that value chain. So what parts will you let go, or are you going to control every single aspect of it? Will you invest in technology? What will you invest in technology for? These are some of the basic questions that pop up as soon as you're starting to think about scale. These are, some basic questions that pop up. Yeah, let's move on. But it's important at this point in time, to put this into context and say, okay, if I am looking at scale, or if I am at a stage as an organization to go for scale, there are a few tools that one can use. Can we go slightly down, Samita? Yeah, but that's it. Thank you. Now, essentially, I found a couple of tools, in my journey that have been quite useful. And I specifically mentioned the scaling scan tool, which is a tool that's actually come out of the agriculture industry, where they've looked at, what do you really, how do you, maybe you can put this in the chat. Okay. And this particular thing essentially breaks this step of scaling down into 3 steps, which is one is, can you scale your ambition, which is, what do you want to scale? So in this particular case, we know that this is a community-based organization that wants to scale its workshop model to 5,000 communities. For whom? For specific caregivers. When? Let's say in a year's time or 2 years' time. Why? Because it believes that the outcomes or the learning outcomes for children can improve, the caregiver skills are improving. So first step, as the readiness to scale indicator, is to identify what is it that you're really trying to do, bring clarity on your goals and aspirations. Secondly is analyzing your scaling ingredients. So for this particular case, as you see, there are workshops. So there is some contextual knowledge, some contextual skills that this organization must have built. So that one particular piece will be the key for it to scale. Secondly is, if you're building an organization that will scale to 5,000, to communities, then obviously, and if you're thinking about building a large organization, then you'll have to think about the leadership and management aspect, because there will be a lot of human resources that you'll have to manage. Obviously, from a private perspective, you also have to, or in a not-for-profit context also, you have to understand whether there is a demand for this project also or not, or for this product, program, project or not. And from a private perspective, is there a business case, in place which is beneficial to all the users? Are some of the things that you have to think about. There are about 10 of these that are mentioned in the scaling scan tool. Some of them will be relevant to your particular use case, some of them won't. But I definitely highly recommend for you to go through it, to just skim and see, where are you in that journey. So once you've scaled your ambition, you know what you want to do, when you want to do it, why you want to do it. You're clear about what are some of the ingredients or some aspects that are needed for you to scale. The third thing is to identify, okay, there are some aspects you might be doing great at, some aspects that will need more attention. So in that aspect, what you could do is to identify the ingredients that need most attention. So for example, in this particular case, it's very clear that going from 5 communities to 5,000 communities, if that is the aim, then most likely, even if this person chooses to go in a manner where they want to scale or they want to do this all in a house, which means a lot of focus on leadership and management will be needed. A lot of focus on technology will be needed, because managing such a massive workforce from a human resource standpoint is also a big challenge. But if this person or this founder goes the other way, which is, let's say, the lean way, then definitely the focus area has to be technology. And from whatever we have read till now, we know that the focus hasn't been technology. If we read that use case again, so we understand that technology definitely is going to be one aspect that will need more attention. Leadership and management possibly will also need more attention in this particular case. But I definitely highly recommend for you guys to go through the scaling scan tool and the scaling up tool. Both of them are kind of similar. I personally like the scaling scan tool more. That helps you assess your readiness to scale. Let's move on. Secondly is, in terms of, you can identify, you can be very objective about figuring out what aspects are needed for you to scale, which are your strengths, which are your weak points. All of that can be done. But then overall, there is context added to it, which is what is your preference? How are you as a founder or a founding team thinking about building your organization? In this particular case, we know that the founder or the founding team wants to build a small company, which means that they want to go lean. They don't want to build a behemoth or a large organization. They also want to shift from a non-paying to a paying customer model. These, I'm going to differentiate between customer and beneficiary, so you know that they definitely want to shift from a non-paying to a paying customer model in order to alleviate some funding risks. I'm guessing there is diversification of funding resources. That's something that they're looking at, which means that they're also thinking about long-term sustainability. Now, a quick note on, if you look at this particular case from 5 to 5,000 communities, scaling itself is a complex new skill, right? It requires newer partners. This founder will definitely need to either partner with other organizations or will need a much larger organizational structure, which means that till now they would have managed a small team. Managing a large team is a new skill that not just this founding team, but all the managers will need to understand. So there are these shifts that are happening. It is a complex task. It is kind of establishing a new normal for yourself, but also for the outside world, which makes it even more complex. And this is obviously not something that comes to you when you're building it, but in the hindsight, when I think about this, your preference is actually on how you want to build the company is actually, I think, quite critical. And if it is not fun building what you're building, then would it even be worth doing, is a question to definitely think about. So 2 things I've mentioned till now. One is your readiness to scale metrics or tools. Second is, what is your founder preference when you're thinking about it? In this case, we know that he wants to build a small company, he wants to shift the financial model from non-paying to a paying customer. That's the preference of the organization. Let's move on. The third thing, I think, is founding team clarity, which is that, for example, in this particular case, X talks about improving the access to quality education available to children in Anganwadis, right? Like, so if that is the focus, or that's the clear goal, obviously you can quantify it by saying, what do you mean by access to quality education, etc. So that definite level of clarity one can dive into. But the second level of clarity is, I think, super critical, which is that when you're thinking about scaling, there is a doer and a payer of scale. What does that really mean? What that means is that at the scale level of, or let's say at the population level, let's say of a state or even a district, if that's large enough for the organization, there has to be some amount of local delivery, either by tech, by community-based organization, by people, and there has to be a self-generating or perpetual financing of it. So in private markets, it's easy because the customers, I mean, not easy, but the customers pay for it, which then becomes a self-generating or perpetual financing. In the government space, governments have specific, budgets on specific line items that they continue to finance until there is a massive policy shift, obviously. So, which essentially means that this founder or the founding team also understands that there is only two clear ways in terms of building a model. One is either you build it through the government because that enables the population level addressing of a problem, or you do it through private markets where customers start to pay for the services that you kind of do. One really interesting and a must-read article, I would say, is through Molago, which is choosing your doer and a payer. I'll quickly explain what doer and a payer is. Doer essentially is who will do the actual act of workshops. So in this particular case, will it be the organization? Because if you choose to be that organization which will then conduct workshops across these 5,000 communities, then you are choosing to be a certain kind of organization. Or is it going to be multiple NGOs working together? Then you're choosing to spend, because it is your program and you want to leverage other NGOs' reach to reach 5,000 communities. It means that you will have to spend time in building that coalition or in building that partnership, right? So are you doing it yourself? Are you doing through NGOs? Are you doing through the government? Or are you doing through a set of businesses through licensing or packaging or whatever those kinds of deals? So doers are essentially one has to think about it more or less at the industry level when you're thinking about it from a government or a business standpoint. If you're looking at scale, and payer, essentially, there are mostly only three kinds of payers. One is obviously the customer who you're serving. Second is the government through the taxes that they collect from individuals like us. And third, obviously, is through private capital. I'd also count philanthropic capital in that same light as well for a not-for-profit context. So when you're thinking about scale, the most important thing to think about is who will do these activities at scale. And second most important question is obviously who will be paying for these activities at scale. And that, at least in this case, seems to be that for X, they have chosen that their intervention will be scaled through the government. So we have three sets of information at this point in time, and we're looking for this particular case. Can we move on? So let me just quickly recap. What I've done till now is I've given you a case of this organization X that wants to scale. I have talked about three specific things. One, obviously, I've talked about some basic questions that will come for this founder when he's thinking about scaling. The second thing that I've talked about is founder clarity in terms of the model. He knows that, or she knows that this is going to be scaling through the government. The government will be paying or doing this program. We'll see more. Second aspect is in terms of the readiness to scale metrics, so that this person has done, and kind of realize that technology is one aspect that needs to be focused on in the manner that this needs to be built. And then third important information that we have is that this person doesn't want to build a large behemoth. he or she wants to look at a 10-15 member organization and wants to build in that way. Now, in terms of like creating a universe of options that this person has, I wanted to kind of highlight what are some of the options that come up when you're thinking about scaling. So the next couple of slides are slightly more theoretical. What I would love for everyone to do is to, write down examples of what you think are examples of the organizations that are following a certain goal or a strategy. Let's get to these slides and then I can illustrate more. Samita, can we move next? Right. So when you're actually thinking about your scaling choices are either through a direct service, which means that you're directly engaging with your beneficiaries or customers, or through an indirect service, which is that while you're not directly interacting or engaging with your customers, there are other measures in place in which whatever your activities are, they are actually influencing the way that a customer or a beneficiary is thinking or behaving or acting or deciding or making decisions, right? So the direct service way simply is, an increased quantity and quality of the impact, which means that for X specifically, they can go to multiple communities, they can offer different services. Let's say they're doing a workshop program right now, they can do another program that impacts child learning. They can also expand geographically. They can go from, let's say, area 1 to, area 1 in state 1 to area 2 in state 2, or a different region altogether. In terms of indirect services, there are, you can influence public policy essentially, which means that you can generate knowledge while you're still working with 5 communities. You can generate knowledge, you can generate insights for policies, and then directly work with the policymakers to influence certain policies that are specifically directed to your zone of area. So, for example, if you're working in skill development and focusing again on, let's say, creating better linkages of certain skill areas to industry, then using that kind of information to go and lobby with the Ministry of with the industries. Ministry of Industries, you could always go and kind of pitch for those kind of policies as well. Second is establishing a social movement. This is something that we have a great example of. Like if you think about it, on a political level, I mean, the biggest example is Aam Aadmi Party coming up because of a certain social movement around corruption that popped up, right? It kind of help them scale from not even existing to existing and now being in 2 states in that way. Third option is changing or creating markets in terms of indirect service. And obviously, one mixed option, at least I consider this as a mixed option, is replicating our organization model, which means that you continue to operate in the zone that you're in or in the space that you're in with, let's say, 5 communities in X's case. And then whatever you're learning from these experiments that you're conducting, you use that to then lobby with other not-for-profits, other organizations, and use that idea to kind of scale in number. Yeah, let's move on. And the key thing to realize here is that whatever choices you're making, your strategy options kind of like map onto each of those choices. So if you're saying that, okay, I want to increase the quantity of my impact by diversifying, into communities or different geographical regions, then you're essentially what you're saying is that if it is a direct impact, that means that you will now be an organization who is not just in this one city or one state, but you'll also be an organization in another state or another city, right? Would love to hear examples of organizations that you think are multi-site organizations or network of affiliated but independent organizations, or a think tank, or organizations that are purely focused on influencing public awareness or through means of communication. I would love to hear examples in the answers in what you guys are sharing, please. In terms of the choices and the options, what one can look at is, for example, in terms of influencing public policy, you see that there is a greater generation of knowledge that you will have to do. You'll have to propose policies. You'll have to work with the policy makers directly. It's kind of the think tank approach. There are multiple think tanks in India that are currently working, with the states. Political parties themselves have their own think tanks. Niti Aayog in itself is a thinking and a doing tank in that way. And similarly, like if you're looking at, for example, establishing a social movement, public awareness, public behavior, means of communication, how do you inform, educate, influence becomes a critical aspect. Advocacy becomes a critical aspect in terms of engaging policymakers directly as well. So all the choices that you're making in terms of scaling, the strategy to scale in that way is kind of mapped. It's kind of tied into into these choices. One aspect that we missed, which we will show in the next slide, is the aspect of replication of your organization model. Now, in this particular case, essentially what happens, it's kind of almost, it's in the similar light as like advocacy, where essentially what you do is you become technical assistant, you provide technical assistance to the government. So, for example, Pratham does this a lot in the education arena, where it works with state governments on certain policy narratives, on building certain kinds of interventions that improve either foundation learning or improves, specifically math outcomes in that way, or early childhood outcome as well. So you can become a technical assistant. You can do a lot of knowledge dissemination by keeping yourself grounded in the areas that you're in, but use those learnings to then influence, other parties, other areas as well. For-profit organizations, or licensing is typically one of the ways to do this. So you build you build something, you develop the IP for it, you license it out, and then you let the other organizations, take your, while you keep the ownership, you can take your product or program or whatever that you're doing to newer geographies as well. That's another option of scaling. Partnerships, alliances are another ways if you look at from a not-for-profit standpoint, but if you look at an organization like a FICCI or a NASCOM, these are also examples of organizations coming together that are serving the same needs. This is an example of influencing the public policy, where organizations, for example, NASCOM, you have all the technology organizations, the shared goals and objectives coming together and trying to influence policy through this one organization. That's another example of doing that. Let's move on. So, like I was saying that, in this particular case, we see that X has a penchant for building a small company, doesn't want to build a big company, wants to shift from a non-paying to a paying customer model, knows that the intervention has to be scaled through the government, which means that the government has to be the one that, does the intervention or conducts the workshops. If you put two and two together, you'll see what's coming in the next slide, essentially, which is that, it's pretty clear that X wants to build an organization where they are scaling the programs via a doing and a paying government. While his choice or her choice to build a small organization, which is of 10 to 15 people, clearly indicates that this person will not be able to, serve 5,000 communities on their own self. In addition to that, he wants to, or she wants to build a paying customer, which means that whoever this person is, whoever this institution is, has to be paying for this proposition or this scale to work. So in some sense, your scaling strategy is not just about the options of scaling that you have. It's also about the clarity that you have in terms of your model. It also is dependent on the preference that you have. Why is it that you're trying to, in what manner would you want to build your organization? These are some of the things to be clear about. Some questions. Sangat is a good example. I think I've been following Sangat's work for now. Franchise. I'm unsure what at what time this franchise was done, but licensing, franchising, where you own the particular brand and then you use that to sort of, to license out, are examples of, again, scaling. Yep, Center for Mental Health Law and Policy, Teach for India, definitely multi-site, absolutely. Will the recording be shared with the participants? That I think Samita can answer for herself. Was the intervention of Meraki designed to be scalable from the concept stage? That's a great question. Actually, for us, no. When we started, we knew that eventually the government has to pick up these experiments. We had that clarity that we wanted the government to adopt the programs that we were running, because primarily when we started, we were working directly with parents only. And we knew that there was the gap in both, from both the private markets as well as the government, where there were no programs or capacity building programs for parents. So we knew that we wanted the government to pick up these programs. But when we started, I think we did not have the clarity of what we really wanted to build in terms of programs. We also obviously didn't know what kind of impact these programs do have. Once we started to get those results is when we really started to think about how would we want to scale. And that is when a lot of the changes essentially happened for us. A lot of the, I think, academia, or I would say the people who are in the know-how for a long time talk about being clear on day zero about your doer and a pair. I think before that, it's important to be clear about your product and making sure that what you have is actually delivering value, and then really thinking about how do you want to scale that. I don't know if there is any specific and a question or a follow-up to that, but I'd be happy to answer that if that's it. Let's move on. So we are in a stage where we have clarity on what does this scaling really mean. It means increasing the quantity and quality impact by building a multi-site organization, investing to improve, obviously, improve and increase the effectiveness of programs, influencing public policy, because influencing public policy through direct advocacy and lobbying, because it's important to influence resources for the issues that you're building. So it's clear to us that X doesn't just want to stay in the 5 communities that they are. They want to scale, they want to build a small organization, and they see 2 ways of doing this. One is obviously getting the government to deliver these programs, and second is also lobbying and advocating for these programs to be picked up in the larger scheme of things. Let's move on. Now we've kind of looked at scaling impact. Let's now start to look at what does that while staying lean part look like. Now, while there is a set of science that talks about scaling impact a lot, and if you look at the presentation till now, there are certain frameworks, there are certain ways in which one is looked at. I think staying lean bit is purely from an experiential standpoint, which is that it has come to me, that clarity has obviously come to me as I've kind of like built it. Obviously, X is also Meraki, so like that one we are clear about, I'm sure. But let's talk briefly about what does staying lean really mean, and then see if you have more questions on that aspect. The key idea, or simply put, if you have to think about scaling and while staying lean, I think it's about increasing in size. Let's get to the next slide. So what, in my experience, and in my experience of being a part of founders communities across NSRCEL, a few incubators I've been a part of as well, and from my personal experience, I think there are 4 specific cases in which CEOs, founders, organizations choose to stay in. Right, one is that it's a part of who they are. It's nimbleness or agility is a core part of who they are. They want to experiment, learn, build, move. That's in the nature of the organization. Second is you're forced to do it. So let's say you're in a resource constrained environment. Let's say you're in the Northeast where funding is not easy to come by, or at least hasn't been easy to come by, or in states where the talent is not that great. There aren't great universities to tap into great talent. Talent from metros doesn't want to move to those kind of areas. So there is a resource constrained environment which then forces you to think about agility or nimbleness. Third is that there are certain kinds of people who want to punch above their weight. They want to do more with less. So if you like or you like doing that, and that's definitely one of the choices that you make. And finally, this is not just a startup or a problem that occurs only in organizations that are nascent in their nascent stage or starting up. This also happens in large lethargic organizations when the mobility is really low, and you feel stuck, you feel fed up of the bureaucracy, and you want to kind of move things along. And in that way, for a project to project basis, you're always kind of thinking about how do I do this quickly, how do I do this in an effective manner, an efficient manner where I can experiment, learn, and move quickly. Some of the misconceptions around saying lean are obviously cost cutting yoga, like there's nothing else. Slow growth, it must be slow growth. What can you do if you're just 5 people, right? Like you can't do anything at all, or 10 people or 15 people. You need to have a 100-member team to really get to, let's say, for example, in this case, 5,000 benefits. Or it must be about cutting corners or cutting costs. That's kind of, I think, that's not true, is what is emerged from my experience. Let's move on to the next slide here. Building lean, like I said, I think right in the front, to me is creating maximum return for every rupee that you've invested. So if you've invested 100 rupees, if your return right now, let's say in a financial term, if in investment of 100 rupees, you are at a 60, you want to get to an actual, let's say 150. So you're trying to minimize that possible and the actual gap, which is if you're currently getting 60 rupees out of 100 rupees ka investment and you want to get to 150, you're trying to figure out how do you get from that 60 to 150, right? You're trying to minimize that possibility versus the actuality gap. The outcomes that you're achieving right now versus ideally what you can achieve, you're trying to minimize that gap all the time. And staying lean or building lean essentially is a way to do that. Returns in this case also obviously can be social, financial. So for profit organizations, it's easier obviously to kind of build that clarity. For social impact organization, there are certain interventions that aren't well evaluated, or so for example, in our case, when we were building parental investment or parental ability, there weren't a lot of tools at that time which we could use to kind of communicate or build a language around in terms of communicating the social impact. But in terms of financial impact, you know that there is clear clarity in terms of how can you communicate what that actual gap is and kind of minimize that. Let's move on. Once we know that essentially what we are trying to do is create maximum return for every rupee that we've invested, there are 3 essential basic questions really, right? One is, what is your goal? What does that return really look like? Is your goal improved organization revenue? Is it just decreasing maternal mortality rate, increasing farm incomes, increasing government's investment? What is it that you're really trying to do? So laser focused clarity on what your goal is. Where are you currently investing your rupees? So is it people, processes, technology? What is taking, where are you investing that amount? And thirdly, what are the focus areas for you? What aspects should you be focusing on to maximize that return? Now, this can be contextual. Obviously, it is contextual for not-for-profits, for-profits, because you might be in different industries, you might be building differently, you might have a different mixture or ratios of technology investments and curriculum processes, etc. So it's contextual. But in my understanding, in my learning, there are 2 key aspects that I have learned are critical. And these are kind of, I look at them as horizontal areas. When I say horizontal, I mean these are two aspects that permeate through your organizations across. If you can move ahead, Priya, to the next slide. So the number one issue when we are talking about creating, maximum bang for your buck or maximum return for your rupee invested is, there's lack of clarity about what will be required to achieve sustained results. And to me, like the horizontal areas or the areas that permeate through your organization, there are two focus areas I feel that are super critical for you to get right in order to scale right. One is obviously talented people, because essentially think about this, right? If you're wanting a maximum return to every rupee invested, you have to create a scenario or a situation where you are enabling each and every one of your people or individuals to punch above their weight, right? You want them to replicate essentially the same idea that you're trying to do organizationally. Second thing is, which, in different people will use different languages. But I call it like the building of things essentially, and specifically things that are your secret ingredients. For example, the expertise or the IP that you're building, the processes that you're setting in place to be able to deliver what you need to deliver, and thirdly, obviously, is the technology. I won't get too knee deep into this because obviously there we have limited time. But I just wanted to touch upon them so that to leave a certain kind of thought or at least thinking around these areas. So the two areas are talent and people and building things. Let's quickly look at what these really mean. In terms of talent, from my experience, again, like these are 5 qualities that quickly tell you whether this person is a right fit in an organization that wants to stay lean, in an organization that wants to punch above their weight, in an organization that wants to stay agile. Ownership is number 1, resilience, self-awareness, confidence, learning, agility, and resourcefulness, which essentially means, people who can pick up and see things through, people who can take multiple punches to their gut, people who know when to leverage, what or who, people who are quick to learn and quick to adapt, and people who can essentially, have high learning agility and, high resourcefulness. These are key ideas that are important to sort of think about when you're thinking about staying lean. You have to be able to hire right. You have to be able to get the right people in who are able to stay lean and kind of multiply your impact. There are a few resources within the presentation which I'll not get into, but if you can take me to the next slide, Priya. Within this, I've tried to kind of put together a summary of like, in each of these verticals, what do you test for? What kind of frameworks can you use? You can go through this once this presentation is shared. I'm guessing you'll have access to this, and you can kind of look at this. For resilience, learning agility, resourcefulness, again, aspects on what to test and what kind of tools can you use. You'll have these resources in the presentation as well. Second thing that one looks at is building expertise. Now, building expertise essentially, specifically in our scenario, when you're looking to scale, is expertise around core organization functions, key differentiators, things that will differentiate you in the existing market. You have to build that expertise. Everything else can be outsourced. I'm not saying that you have to outsource them, but you can look at a right mix of building in-house and outsourcing. And one of the frameworks that I've found to be useful in terms of thinking about what to outsource and what to build in-house. In terms of outsourcing, you want to be able to outsource everything that requires a steep skill, but in a short time. What does that mean? That means that if you need something, a skill gap to be filled very quickly for a short duration, and that skill gap cannot be picked up by your own team, you don't have that skill within the organization to be able to fill it, outsource it. And obviously it has to be a non-core function. So For example, if you're a technology-based company, you will not obviously outsource technology because that is the core of what you do. But then that's what you will build in-house because that's a core function. You need it long-term. You need the protection of IP. And also that technology is going to give you the competitive edge or advantage across your competitors or within the industry landscape. So within outsourcing on building in-house, remember core things have to be built in-house. You have to build, and these are core things that are obviously needed in the long term, and helps you differentiate across the organization. Next is processes. This is, each whatever. So when you're building things, you're building expertise, but you're building processes. These processes have three essential aims. One is to bring role clarity. Like I said right in the beginning, one of the big challenges is lack of clarity on what is needed to scale sustainably, right? And it's very important for you to build that role clarity across stakeholders and not just within the organization, but for example, externally as well. So in this particular case, if X wants to work with the government, whatever it does with the government, whatever stakeholders specifically, be it the principal secretary, the director, the deputy director, or the district officers or the block level officers, X needs to be clear what it wants from each of those officers. X also needs to build a clear R&R on what are the roles and responsibilities of each officer within that value chain, apart from obviously the team. It is very important to build processes around bringing role clarity. Building an R&R is step one, obviously, and there are other things that you can do. Second is you want to remove or minimize bottlenecks. Essentially, in a small team or a team led by a strong founder, what usually tends to happen is that there tends to be a lot of bottlenecks. So clarity on who takes what kind of call. So for example, if you're sitting with the government, or if you're sitting with a vendor, or if you're sitting with a partner organization, and if you just ask them to incorporate a certain program, they've asked for financials from you or from your teammate, you have to be clear whether your teammate can actually take this call, right? So on financial end, on product end, on program end, who can take what call. Clarity on that is super critical, because that essentially are sure that about I'm saying access to quality knowledge, not just quality knowledge. So when you think access, then you're thinking about also tools that you will use to provide that access. So will you use, for example, what kind of technological tools will you use? What kind of structuring of files will you use? All of those things are important for people who are just starting out. A simple hub and spoke model where there is a one core main document which leads or links to all the aspects of a particular process or a program, that is critical to have, and that is also critical to build knowledge quickly. So do make sure that you're doing all of these things through building processes. You're building role clarity, easing decision making, and making access to quality organization knowledge really fast. Some of the examples that I can quickly share, from our experience has been, Priya, if you can move. If you look at this, essentially what we've been able to do is, on exhibit A, what I'm demonstrating is that for us, it's critical that across the pipeline of the officials, everyone should have clear RNRs. So we built, from the state level to district level to block level to cluster level, every single officer has a very clear RNR on what they're supposed to do. On the right, there is an SOP for all the core processes. Now, this SOP essentially is our Meraki's knowledge on how to work with the women and child development department. So we've actually kind of built out a one pager where we have a very clear idea on, which stakeholder can do what, and what are some of the calls that this person can take, and what are some of the things that we have to do. Next slide, please. This is again like an example of making access to quality knowledge within the organization fast. If you look in, and once you have access, you can zoom in and see that essentially what has happened is we've broken down one particular program that we do into simple steps, and then kind of linked all of that knowledge through a simple linking, which means that if I have to, let's say, hire a new individual, or if I have to quickly revise what are key components of this program, I can just go to this document, quickly see from here whatever it is that I need to rejig on. It allows me to access this knowledge quickly. It also helps new hires to upskill themselves quickly as well. Let's move on. Last is the invest in technology. Like, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of you are very are much savvier in technology than I am, but I found two things to be two problems generally while scaling, two kinds of problems that people set into. One is that the core focus is only the problem that you're solving. For technology, I think it serves two aims. One is obviously the problem that you're solving, and second also is that you have to use technology to aid your own decision making within the company, within the organization. So if it's a small team, you want to be able to use tools, for example, like Zoho, for example. These are easy to access, almost free tools now that one must leverage to ease decision making. Role clarity, decision making, again repeating myself, but these are super critical to be built out if you want to maximize the bang for the buck, or the return on the investment that you're making. And technology kinds of aids that process. Second is kind of a rejig of that, of the B point here, which is essentially, technology can multiply the output of people and the processes that you have. So definitely invest a lot in training, upskilling them, or making sure that people have access to that. And finally, one of the problems or challenges that I've seen is that, and specifically with organizations that haven't, who don't have founding teams or founding members who are very tech savvy, they don't think enough about the technology choices that are making. And if scale is at cards, if scale is something that you're thinking about, at the initial stages, do invest your own time and money to invest in technology that can actually scale with your scaling aspirations. Generally, what happens is, so for example, there are two kinds of mistakes what can be made here. Choosing the right or wrong kind of technology. For example, this is slightly technical, but Meraki kind of chose Python as a coding language for one of our platforms, which backfired very badly on us, because it ensured that we had to dedicate not just code tech individuals to sort of maintain a certain platform, but it also took a lot of time of our non-technology / content partners to at least invest a lot of significant time in being able to serve that particular platform. So and the kind of functionality that we needed we were not able to build that through Python. So we had to use a different technology or coding language to be able to sort of address those kinds of things. So simply put, essentially, if you're not somebody who's very tech savvy, I think spend some time really thinking about whether the choices of technology that you're making, whether they will stay in line with when you scale or with your scaling aspirations or not. Do invest a lot of time in figuring that out, and then obviously make investments in those technologies that scale with your aspirations. So these are essentially it. I think that's kind of the presentation for today. Quickly want to just summarize for staying lean. It is about creating the maximum return on the investments you're making. In my experience, the talent or the people that you have will determine whether you can continue to stay lean or not. Secondly, your aspect of building things, which includes expertise, processes, and technology, will fundamentally multiply the output that you're getting from the people that you are working with. That's about it. Happy to address any questions that we may have. And back to Priya, Samita. If there are any questions, happy to address them. How did you survive the initial years when resources are scarce? I can see that that's an old question, but let me address that quickly. I think depending on, I think there is the landscape is pretty good at this point in time. I mean, NSRCEL is one. I think definitely reach out to the NSRCEL team and the Impact Orbit program. We definitely benefited from the incubator spaces, or initially applying to incubators like NSRCEL. Eventually, we also applied to Nudge. We got through. Incubators are a good space to be. Crowdfunding is definitely a channel to look at. But again, it completely depends. If Vidya, if you can give me a little bit of context, maybe I can be very specific in terms of addressing it. I think in terms of like for-profit or impact organizations, social impact organizations, there are a lot of work is being done by Startup India, Invest India as well. So I think definitely look at those kinds of resources.
Do you want to go through a few more questions? Do we have time or?
I am happy to address questions. Are others able to hear me? Were people not able to hear me? That sounds sad.
No, we had like team members as attendees as well, and Priya and I were both able to hear you.
Okay, cool. Build in-house eventually leads to heavy system with more employees. I mean, it completely depends. I love the example of WhatsApp, and WhatsApp obviously is an exception. Back in and it's actually one of the inspirations when I think about like building Meraki. Obviously, the use case is different, but if you look at WhatsApp back in 2014, each of their employee was serving almost, I think 4 million, if I'm not wrong, the number of people, 40 million or 4 million people they were serving, each of their employees. They are a team less of around, I think, 30 employees at that point in time. And they were able to build something so massive. So it clearly, I mean, it depends on the kind of model that you're using. Building in-house doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have more employees. If you're a technology-enabled organization, obviously that kind of goes away. But if you're a community-based organization, that definitely holds true. That if you build in-house everything, it will lead to a heavy system with more employees. If you're a community-based organization, not leveraging technology. Hinal's question is, what tool have you used to build the SOP in one page? That's a very interesting question. I will have to come back to you on that. I think we built it out on we built it out on the Word doc itself, I think, on Excel, I think, and then eventually it was, I think we used either Photoshop or some tool like that. I'll have to come back on that. I'm not 100% sure that. How important is partnership in scaling the impact? I think important depends on the options that you are picking up. Collaboration is key, but please do know that there is a cost to collaboration. Always address who is paying for that cost. If you are partnering with NGOs, then generally, if the NGO is a slightly better off, financially better off organization, then they can also afford to pay you. If it's not an organization that is well off. Obviously, there is no financial incentive there. Then think about who can pay. Will it be a philanthropic capital? Will you approach CSR? Partnerships are great, but in resource-starved environments, always think about who is paying for those partnerships, because there is a cost attached to those partnerships. If you're not addressing that, I think partnerships generally do not fail. Obviously, largely for a social impact organization, your overall goals and the way to achieve them have to be kind of aligned as well. Any tips on hiring the right people for services company, Namita? If there is tips, I think in terms of the values that you look for, I've kind of shared. I think there are certain tools and frameworks that I've also shared in the presentation. I think you'll have access to that. Apart from that, any tips on hiring the right people? I think one of the things that I've learned the hard way is culture is greater than talent. Obviously, you're checking for baseline skill map when you're hiring for individuals. Once that baseline is met, always hire for the right culture, rather than the higher talent. We faced that situation where we've had to let go of a couple of folks who have been actually more talented but weren't the right fit because they didn't have that ownership within them, to take the organization forward, didn't have the learning agility that we wanted for them to have. So that definitely is to look at. Real-time errors and mistakes is not to build clarity, not to support your team, not to build structures in place where individuals can seek clarity. When you're building lean, essentially, I think one of the things that I have learned is that you obviously want people who can pick up things and run with it and see it to the end, right? So you want to do that. As a founder, I found myself in situations where you're always thinking whether to what extent should you spoon feed, or to what extent should you support an individual? Will that make them dependent? Will that hamper their independence? These are questions that obviously come to mind when you're thinking about people specifically. And I think making sure as a founder, as an individual who's building something, making sure that there is a right mix of giving people enough to chew on before they take that flight. That critical piece has to be addressed from a people standpoint. I think secondly is, again, if you're looking at the most basic errors, I think when you're hiring for people, if you're a lean organization, if you're looking at advocacy, absolutely and always check for example, writing samples of individuals, because advocacy is not just done by the founder or the founding team, it's done by everyone. So you need everyone to be able to kind of articulate or communicate their ideas better. That's another key mistake that we made, or I've seen we made from a people standpoint. The larger piece again is role clarity, internal and external. Lack of clarity on who makes what decision when. These are key mistakes that we make. Shravanti, how would moving from a sole proprietorship to a partnership function? What would I have to keep in mind? Unfortunately, I don't have the relevant expertise to be able to address that. I'm sorry. Any tips on approaching new customers for scaling up? Supriya, if you can be more specific around this question, that would be great. What are some key strategies or best practices you recommend for maintaining lean operation while scaling impact, especially in resource constraint? I think the two that I have mentioned are the ones. Which is focus on your talent, and focus on building expertise, on building processes and building technology. Leverage technology. There are a lot of quality but resource light options that are available right now in the space that you can leverage. I would say reach out to folks like Priya and Samita at NSRCEL. And I've found, incubators to be incredibly kind and nice and in terms of sharing their knowledge on what could actually work. So definitely reach out to folks here. But yeah, that's about it. There are a lot more questions. I don't know if you have the time, Samita, Priya. I would let you take it from here and yeah, guide us.
We are running a little short on time, so maybe we could give them a way to connect with you, and then they could reach out in case of some questions, and maybe they'd want to talk to you one-on-one, so they could reach out to LinkedIn or email or something. And if we could give them that connect, then we'll move on to the closing.
Super. I have actually in the presentation itself, there is, I've shared my email ID. I'll just share this here. Happy to address any questions.
I think you can put your LinkedIn link here as well. I think that would be easier for everyone.
Yeah, I'll just quickly share it.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly share that.
By the time Seemant is doing that, we would just like to share that, as Samita mentioned, that our applications for the impact program is open. So please feel free, if you are eligible for the criteria, to apply for the program, for the impact orbit program, with where Seemant was alumni of the program. So please do apply. We have shared the link in the chat as well.
Yeah, and also happy to share tips on selection on the program as well, if that is something that would be required. Happy to assist on that. I've been a judge as well, I think, because of the kind folks at NSRCEL. So happy to give you the inside story as well.
Yeah, true.
This would be my LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with everyone here. And hope this was useful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Seemant. I think we've seen some immediate feedback in terms of how detailed and engaging the session was, how useful it was as well. Thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to everyone today. It was, I think we can all agree, it was certainly a helpful session. And over and above that, to all of you who joined us today, thank you so much for dialing in, for being with us, throughout the entire hour and a half. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all, and I hope we see you soon in our future webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.